Apollo Amateur Night, and bloopers. That's what's coming up on the Art of Bombing, episode 165.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to a brand new episode of The Art of Bombing. It is Tuesday, October 27th, 2020. Dan Booblets Jr. here with you again, as always, because this is my podcast, and you're listening to it, so you know who I am, most likely, and if you don't, well, nice to meet you. It is Halloween week. It is the Halloween season, and this is the last week of October, leading up to Halloween, which is on Saturday. Are you doing anything fun in the season of the witch? Ghosts and ghouls, tricks and treats. Whatever you decide you're going to be doing, if you're getting in costume and you're going out and you're doing whatever, make sure you do it safe. Remember, stay safe so you can live to love. That's the tag at the end of the show. That just keep that in mind. Be safe, whatever you do. I hope everybody has a safe and happy Halloween. Today on the show, I have a great guest, a good friend of mine, Maher Matta, joined me from Washington, D.C. area. He is a fantastic comic that I met in San Diego. He also has a dry bar comedy special out. And, we met in San Diego, and I got to have him on the podcast, and it was great. We had a great conversation. He, had a lot to say about comedy, especially in this COVID world that we're living in. So that's what's going to be coming up on the show. Great conversation with Maher. And before we get to that, though, let's handle some business, shall we? Some business. If you're a fan of mine, and I know you are if you're listening to this, right? That's how it's going to be. I was on another podcast this week called Duck, Duck, Grey Duke with Chris and Kim Duke. You might remember Chris Duke. He's a comedian, and he was also on The Art of Bombing, episode 151. So go check me out on their podcast. It was a great time. We talked about comedy, comic books, some of my old jobs that I had while I lived in California, and things of that nature. It was a great, fun time. And we tried a new snack, and I actually liked it, which reminds me, I need to go to Target and see if I could find some of those little candies that we tried, because they're healthy. They're not completely bad for you. So I gotta go check those out. So go check that out. Duck Duck Grey Duke. It's a great podcast. Check it out. I was on there this week. I will warn you too about this upcoming episode with Maher. It is a little echoey on his end, and that is because he was in his basement, and you can tell acoustically the sound was bouncing off the walls. But it was still a good conversation, so I just wanted to give everybody a quick little warning about that. I will be doing a special thing. I am going to the World Series of Comedy November 9th through the 15th. I'm competing in it. Obviously, I've got one show. But the other thing that I plan on doing is I'm going to be releasing a daily episode of the Art of Bombing podcast, because there's 101 comedians from across the country that will be in Las Vegas for this event, permitting things with COVID don't, change that. I mean, that is always a possibility. Keep that in mind. But as long as the event takes place and I make it there, I'm going to be doing a bunch of little mini episodes or daily episodes. I guess I wouldn't say mini. I say mini in the sense that each episode will probably feature a couple different comics from the event. But every day during the World Series of Comedy, I plan on releasing a Art of Bombing episode. So it's going to be a fun, cool week. Then before that, If you want to see me live, November 5th, I will be at Sisyphus Brewing for the first round of the Minneapolis Funniest Person Contest. I think tickets are $5. You can get it on their website. Seating is limited because of social distancing and the COVID and everything in this world that we're in. So if you want to go to that, make sure you get your tickets pretty quick because they sell out fast. So get those tickets before they're sold out. And for everything else, with the Art of Bombing, make sure if you haven't, please, and I can't emphasize this enough, please leave a 5-star rating on whatever podcast platform you listen to Art of Bombing. Make sure you leave a nice review, say some nice words. The podcast is available on Amazon Music. It's available on Apple Podcasts. It's available on Spotify, Stitcher, basically anywhere you can get this podcast. This podcast is there. And the reviews really help, especially the ratings. The ratings really help because it helps other people discover the podcast. And we want to grow. We want to continue to grow the podcast. I think there's a lot of good information that comes from this podcast, and that's how you can help, by helping me get the information out there. So make sure you give the rating and review, and make sure you share the podcast with somebody. That would be cool, is if you see the podcast, post it on your social media, and tell your friends about it. I'm sure, share it wherever you want to share podcasts, and share it with your friends and family if you think they would like this podcast. I would greatly appreciate that if you did that for me. Everything else for the Art of Bombing, make sure you go to the artofbombingpod.com, and while you're there, sign up for the new mailing list. I'm going to be doing some fun stuff with that. It is a monthly mailing list, so don't worry, you're not going to get spammed. I'm not going to be sending out daily or weekly emails. It is simply once a month. I do a little bit of a recap of the month, of the episodes that came out, and then I'm going to be doing some other fun special things that I'll be sharing specifically through the mailing list. So you're going to want to get on that because it's going to be a good time. All right, now that's all I got for the business and the front end of this. So let's get into this conversation with Maher and enjoy.
It's now time for the stand-up soundbite.
My wife is actually Italian-American, and I am Arab-American. We have the hairiest children you have ever seen. We have squirrels at home, seriously. My son's hairline starts like... It's just he just has two big eyebrows that just come up. I've never seen his face. He's 5. It's just... We debated 2 names for my son, Paul and Mustafa Abdurrahman, and we chose Paul. We don't want to send that to kindergarten. Could you imagine where I grew up? Send that to kindergarten. Mustafa Abdurrahman, could you imagine? Just everybody. Okay, everybody listen up. Got a new student. This is Mustafa Abdul Rahman. Am I saying that right? Does he need a prayer rug, or how does that work? I don't know. Can somebody vacuum the bus? It's hair everywhere. Is he a werewolf or...
I remember when I first got back from Turkey, right when COVID happened, you had me on a show with a friend of yours. This was back in I bet it was March, April.
Mm-hmm. The
and
beginning of the...
Yeah, I remember that like it was yesterday, thinking, okay, this will be over soon.
Yeah, right? I know.
Yeah.
To think we're like, we were kind of experimenting with like streaming and things like that.
Yeah.
Where it's, thinking, this is a nice thing for a month or so, and then everything will be back to normal.
That's right. I just did a 10-minute gig earlier tonight on what's it called, WebEx or something, not Zoom, and I didn't like it as much, but it was fine.
Yeah. They're different. Like, I think it really depends on how it's ran and who's kind of, because like I've done some Zoom shows that were really fun because you could hear the audience laugh and, kind of see them react. And then
go ahead.
I was just saying, and then I've done others where everybody was muted and it was just like throwing jokes into the abyss.
I know. It's so true. And also, like, I think the reason it's tricky for comedians is that I've only done a few of these, but I find that you can't really jump right into material. You have to do a little bit of, okay, this is awkward. Hey, I see you there, Joan. How's your drink tonight? You know what I mean? And then once you've done that, you kind of have a little bit more them on your side, I guess. Or I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's weird. It ends up being just a conversation more than material.
Yeah, it really does. And it's almost like, like you said with the conversation, but it's like you have to build like a rapport with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like essentially you're doing crowd work.
You are doing crowd work. You're forced to do it. And then, like you said, it's distracting because people are getting up, people are talking a little bit, and the mics are on, or people are getting drinks, and there's dogs, and there's kids sometimes, and
yeah, you never know what you're gonna get.
No, you don't know. You don't know what you're gonna get, and then you hang. I do this joke at the beginning usually. I'm like, look, if this show isn't going well, I'm just gonna shut my computer and tell you, hey, sorry, technical issues. Like, you can just walk away from it.
Yeah. Which, although, what does suck though is like if you do the full gig and you bomb, you're still at where you performed. You can't like walk. You might be able to close the computer, but you're still there.
Yeah, and what I was thinking about earlier? I was thinking about the fact that for comics, normally you have to drive to a gig or take public transit or something, and those few minutes of driving to a gig, especially, or you've got to you get in the zone, you listen to some of your music, you kind of get into this, okay, I'm about to do this, and you kind of think about your bits a little bit. Whereas this, it's like, okay, open the computer, then I pace my living room, then I come downstairs, then I look at the screen, then I go. It's not, you don't have time to like sit in your own comedy juices as you do. Yeah. It's weird.
Well, and the same with going home. Like after a show, you have that time to decompress.
That's right.
And you don't really have that. You just like shut your computer and go upstairs, and it's like, shit, I'm still in it.
Yeah, and you still get the buzz going. Like from a good comedy show live, you got that buzz. You might call a friend. You might go have a drink with somebody. Like you're in a good mood.
Yep.
And after this, it's like I got to creep upstairs and my kids are asleep, and I'm like,
it's try not to wake up the family.
That's right. It's really weird, man. Anyway.
It is. No, I'm right there with you. I don't know. I know you're on the East Coast, and I know it's been a lot different there. I know, like now in New York, it looks like they're doing a few things with like outdoor shows and stuff, but that's been pretty popular in the out west, and in the Midwest is doing some outdoor stuff. Not so much now that we got a.
The city of DC is really strict still. I think the surrounding area is loosening up. But the DC Improv is doing some outdoor shows, like proper outdoor drive-in shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. Has there been anything like indoors, or is that all like shut down? Because here in Minnesota, we have shows, indoor shows, like things have opened up. It's at limited capacities. They've decreased the capacities for stuff, but. There's still
Virginia's doing some indoor stuff. The city of DC is not, and Maryland I don't think is yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of where you live and how far you want to travel.
No, absolutely.
Pretty much. But the city is definitely still the strictest. And I think it's really starting to affect the comedy scene. I mean, anyway, we can talk more about that, I suppose. But
well. It's definitely a weird time for comedy. And it's weird because, not obviously just because we've been forced to kind of do some stuff online or whatever and find other ways to make content, but every area is different, like there's some states where nothing's closed and they haven't did anything. And then there's some where everything's closed, or it's like the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And then there's things that are kind of like in between. And So it's
the tricky
weird.
thing, and the tricky thing about comedy is, as you know, live comedy requires the energy that you need in a room, and I don't mean like the philosophical, spiritual energy. I mean literally, you need people in seats.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so when you don't have people pretty much shoulder to shoulder, and if you walk into a comedy club or a comedy venue of any kind, and you see the shoulder to shoulder people packed in there, comics get excited. You're like, oh, this is gonna be
Yep.
a good show. People think it's the opposite. People think comics get nervous when there's a big crowd, but really it kind of fires comics up. We get more nervous when there's a small crowd because now you know, like, you know what I mean?
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
But I have a friend of mine who's a medical professional. He's a doctor down here, and he's a comic as well. And he and I were talking about it like 3 weeks ago. It's the problem with comedy is that you got these low ceiling comedy clubs where people are sitting right on top of each other, and everyone's laughing out loud, hopefully, and so, but then, like you were saying, limited capacity. So a comedy club that normally holds, these big ones that hold 300 people is now down to 100 spread out. It really does change the energy in the room.
It does. And depending on where you're at, some clubs are requiring people to wear masks, like during the show, unless they're eating or drinking. And then there's others that are, once you're at your table, you can take your masks off. So that changes, just wearing or not wearing a mask in a club too kind of changes the energy.
Yeah, and I think people are hungry for it because I did a show in Maryland. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was the first one I had done indoors in a while. And to my surprise, it was a smaller venue, but it was kind of like, it was probably the size of like Comedy Heights. Remember Comedy Heights in San Diego?
Mm-hmm.
Try that size. And it was pretty full. And we were kind of joking about, now I know it's not like a laughing matter, but people were kind of like, well, we're here, and people were ready to laugh. I mean, it's funny how this thing is sounds kind of cliche, but you do kind of realize like people want to get out. They want to laugh. Comics kind of get burned out of hearing their own material. And after hanging out with the same comics over and over, you even get burned out of hearing your buddy's material. But for the audience, this is the first time they've seen Dan, Maher, whoever, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much fun!" And we're like, "Yeah, we know this guy." But that means a lot to people to go out and see comics. But ironically, the only ones burned out of it are the actual comics themselves. So, I don't know.
Well, and especially now, I don't know if you noticed this with the show that you did, but kind of adding on to what you're talking about, people wanting comedy. I really see it now more than ever. Like people are excited. The shows that I've done, that the crowds were there to laugh. It wasn't like one of them situations where you never know what you're going to get with an audience, where sometimes it's a great audience and then sometimes there's just a bunch of people being jerks or whatever. Most of the audiences have been, we want to laugh. Just make us forget about everything for a little while.
That's right. And that's exactly right. And comics too are also presenting that in their material. They're saying things about COVID. They're talking about being bored, lonely. I mean, this is no joke, man. People are like,
oh, absolutely.
Depressed. People are genuinely going through some depression because you don't realize how important it is to be around people. And then suddenly when you're not, even when you are around people, you got to wear a mask. You're distancing yourself from people. It's very awkward. I don't know. It looks it's weird, isn't it?
It is. It's absolutely weird. It is. It's weird and awkward, and it's nothing that we've ever experienced in our lifetime. And
I went to the grocery store yesterday or the day before, and it was the first time, probably since this started back in March, where I really didn't notice my mask. It really didn't. Like I was looking around, and I didn't really notice anyone else's mask. When I first put it on, the only thing I can compare it to is when I first shaved my head. When I first shaved my head, like shaved it, I felt like everyone was staring at me. I felt like everyone was like, God, it looks so weird. And then I got used to it. When I first put on my mask, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like everyone is looking at me funny. Like, why is that guy so? But now it's like, hey, it's like just wearing a shirt. It's like, man. It's and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, it's interesting because in certain areas, even if, wearing a mask, it's like people look at you funny. Like I just got back from Utah. And I drove out there. So I drove I drove through South Dakota, Wyoming, and through Utah. And Utah just starting to do stuff with mask mandates, like they're just now kind of, because it was kind of spiking there, but like Wyoming and South Dakota, you'd be lucky if, like I was on my way home and I stopped in I stayed overnight or whatever, and I went and grabbed breakfast at a Perkins before I came home, and I was like the only one wearing a mask, I walked in there, bunch of hunters and everything just looking at me like I'm ridiculous. And I'm just like, it was too, which is so sad. Because I don't know if you saw that video with the South Dakota governor, but she did a video of her shooting at a pheasant, and she said less, the thing is less COVID, more hunting or something like that. And I was just like, oh, and that's exactly like, you go into places like that and just no tables are closed, like they don't have spaced out for social distancing, just big groups of people not wearing masks. And the whole time I'm in there, I'm just like, I need to hurry up and eat and get the hell out of here.
It feels like there's two kinds of people that don't want to wear masks. There's the people that think it's not going to do anything. Like, who cares if I wear a mask? It's not going to help me. And then there's the person who doesn't want to do it out of spite. Kind of like, no, I'm not wearing a mask. Screw you. I was in South Carolina recently. We went on a little late beach trip. And South Carolina is a no helmet state, meaning you don't have to wear a helmet on a motorcycle if you don't want to. And to my surprise, looking around, I was like, man, very few. There was almost 1 out of 15 was wearing a helmet. I mean, very few people were wearing a helmet. Similarly, people weren't wearing masks. And they were in, like, if you were going to pick up takeout or something, I don't know. But generally speaking, people weren't wearing masks. Up here in Northern Virginia, they are wearing masks big time. And where my cousins live in Georgia, my cousins have been telling me there, people aren't. I don't know. I think it's kind of, I don't think everyone there is just refusing to wear it. I think what happens is once you get a small pocket of people that don't want to wear it, that spreads. And then people go, I'm not going to wear it either. Screw it. What are they going to do? Arrest me?
Yep. That's funny that you use that analogy, because that's a good analogy to describe laughter. When a group of people, how contagious laughter can be, when you're like, and the difference between a small audience and a big audience, how like with a small audience, people get insecure and don't necessarily want to laugh out loud. But when you have those big audiences, and one group of people laughs, then it just spreads through the whole room. And that's why comics prefer those bigger, more packed rooms.
100%. It's funny you say that, because I've thought about that. I've thought about the psychology of why laughter brings more laughter. And I know that if you think about it, if you tell me, hey, Maher, I love this movie. It's a Woody Allen movie. It's hilarious. It's from the 80s. You should watch it with me. And you and I sit down, we have a couple of drinks and we watch it. What you'll find is that you're laughing even harder because I'm watching it with you and laughing with you. Whereas if you were watching it by yourself, you'd go, yeah, this is a funny movie. I really like it. But because I'm there watching it with you and we're laughing together now, you'll go, okay, watch this scene, watch this scene, watch this scene. And then inevitably you will laugh more. And the only thing I can think is that you're laughing because I'm laughing.
Yep. That's exact.
Like you're laughing at me laughing. It's like when you go to a comedy show, or inevitably, what's funny? My dry bar, and I know you just did it too. One of my clips has comments on Facebook, and I'm telling you them.
I can't wait for comments. They're
interesting.
I've been joking about that. And I hadn't even filmed it yet. I was just like, I can't wait for this to get released so strangers on the internet can make fun of me.
Well, yes. And some of them do. Some of the comments were very bland. Yeah. Hey, funny. Some of them were like, not for me. He's not funny. But one video in particular, okay, there happened to be a woman at the show who had a very, very, very dominant laugh. I mean, you could absolutely hear it. And this laugh was very, very loud. It was very squeaky. And me and the other two guys that performed that night, including the MC, I believe, almost every third or fourth comment on these videos on Facebook and YouTube, I think, were specifically around this particular individual. They said, "Oh my gosh, what's up with that laugh? Somebody get some grease for that squeaky door." Blah blah blah. So people were saying these kinds of things, and so I guess people just think that the laugh itself is funny, and it's funny because at the show, people were kind of commenting on her laugh, and people sitting around her they were doing that thing where they turn around, look at her laughing, and then they would laugh because of the way she was laughing. Anyway, I guess the point is that, like you said, laughter creates more laughter.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, and back on that analogy of yours about watching a movie and stuff, that's a really good point too, because then, you're not really laughing at the movie anymore. You're laughing at your friend laughing, but
that's
also
right.
just because it's almost because it ends up forming a bond where
That's
it's
right.
like, now I'm laughing at you laughing because you're laughing at what I thought was funny already.
That's right.
That's right. So like it's very complicated. And
do you know why I think bloopers are funnier than? Think about when you watch bloopers. Bloopers are always funnier than the real script.
Yep.
And the reason I think bloopers are funnier than the real script is because bloopers are real. Like when somebody breaks character and you see them laughing, and especially like I used to watch a lot of the Seinfeld bloopers and Curb Your Enthusiasm and all these big shows when they bloop, I guess. It's hilarious.
It is. In fact, my favorite part of most comedy movies is the credits, because I'm hoping that they show the blooper, because that used to be a kind of a big thing, like in the late 80s and the 90s, like during the credits of a comedy they would show the bloopers. Like that was a common thing.
Well, there were episodes dedicated to that. Remember, there were shows called like ABC Blooper Reel, and they would play Full House and Family Matters and different bloopers.
Yep.
Bloopers were a thing. So so I'm comparing that to comedy writing, which is why I think real life is funnier than made up stuff, material. And I think the longer you do comedy, the more you start writing about yourself and the real situations you've been in. And we've all heard that, how like you start to pour out your heart in your own comedy. And it's funny because it's real. And same thing with bloopers. Bloopers are hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like I said, that was often a lot of my favorite parts of movies, was just watching bloopers, because it is so funny to see, like, and it's also funny to see when somebody's being so funny and in character and serious, and then watching somebody else try to react and they're the ones that break character, like when stuff like that is just always hilarious to me.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Like you said earlier, it's hard to do comedy in front of small crowds, man. You walk in and there's 12 people, and you give them a show, and you guys have fun, and you end up chatting with them, but the energy is just not the same.
Oh, absolutely not. That used to be one of my biggest like fears, maybe even a setback for me, is that now I'm at a point where it doesn't matter how many people are in an audience. I'm going to go out there, give it my all, give them a show. Fine, it'll be what it is. But now, when I first started, I was very intimidated by small audience. A big audience, not a problem. I can go out and be totally, confident and do my stuff and do my thing and be just fine. But if there was only a few people in a crowd, I was so insecure and so unconfident, and just, you could tell I was nervous, and just,
it's weird, isn't it?
It's
really weird.
It was like an awful experience.
It is a terrible experience.
For both, probably them and me.
Yeah. But like I said, the longer you do it, the more you're just like, oh, whatever, I'll just talk to these folks. We'll have a little bit of fun. And then you start to realize that it doesn't matter that much. I mean, you go in there, you have fun.
Yep. And that's kind of the idea that gets lost on a lot of people. The idea is to go in and have fun, not just as yourself as the performer, but to make sure it's fun for everybody there. They're not coming just to laugh. They're coming for a show, but most importantly, they're coming for the experience.
So I'll tell you two of my biggest mistakes that I try to stop doing. Number one, we've already talked about it. Judging the crowd as soon as you walk in, like, oh, these guys are small. They're not going to be into it. There's too many males. There's too many females. There's too many teens. There's too many this, whatever. So then you end up doing your thing and you go, man, that was a blast. These guys were into it. They were fun. So I try to not do that. The next thing I tried to stop doing, and it's less important, I suppose, is judging other comics. There's been a couple of times when you'll be in a green room somewhere, or you'll be in the back of the comedy club, and a comic will come in you've never met before, Tom, whatever, and you shake his or her hand, and you say, "Hey, nice to meet you. I'm a comic as well." And you, because you're a human being, not because you're a comedian, but because you're a human being, start to read that person and go, "Well, they don't seem like they have it together, or their notes are all weird, or I can't imagine this person's going to be very funny. They just don't seem funny. They don't seem funny." And I did that. Right. I trust me, I got a stone face. People tell me I don't seem funny. But then I did it the last time I did it, I was like, never again. I did a show once. This was back when I was living in San Diego. I don't know where it was. It was north of San Diego somewhere. And this guy comes in, and I was like, he just seems like he's just not funny, man. He just seems like sad, and he wasn't making eye contact or anything. I was like, well, I mean, whatever. We'll see how this goes. And he went up there and just, hilarious. Like, it's one of those comics where you're watching, normally as a comedian, if you're watching a comedian, especially a friend of yours, you can kind of go back to your phone. You can kind of talk to somebody. I didn't want to take my eyes off this guy. I thought he was absolutely hilarious. And when he got done, I was like, that was fantastic. And I drove home and I said, I'm never doing that again. I'm never looking at a comedian and assuming anything. I'm not going to, because the opposite happens, where you meet someone and they're so extrovert and so entertaining in the green room, and you go, man, this guy's going to be hilarious. And then you go up and you're like, he was all right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I've been guilty of that. I've been guilty of going in on shows and I'm trying to be all jovial and cool in the green room and fun. And then I go up and I'll have a good show. So I'm saying people might see me that way as well. You never know.
Oh, absolutely. And I can definitely see how that can happen, because especially judging audiences, because I don't know if how many times you've experienced this, but I've had a lot of experiences where I will go to a show and everything about this show says it's going to be terrible. Everything points to this is going to be the worst show.
It's going to be a terrible show. That's right.
And then it ends up being the complete opposite. It's the best show. Everybody has so much fun. Everything was great. And then I'll have shows where it's like, this is going to be the best show. Everything's stacked to say, this is going to be the best show you've ever had, and it's the absolute worst.
Well, I think I told my brother who lives in Australia, he wanted to get into stand-up. He's funny. He's more of an improv guy, but he wanted to get into stand-up. And when someone tells you they want to get into stand-up, and they kind of ask you what to expect, there's no easy way to answer that question. You kind of just go, let me think here. Where should I start? You're like. So my brother wanted to get into stand-up, and I think he did a couple of open mics. Around his first was good. His second or third, he bombed. Truly, truly, truly. And he went into like a spiral, being very upset. And I told my brother, I said, his name is Mazen. I said, Mazen, here's the deal. In stand-up comedy, and this is what I truly believe, Dan. In stand-up comedy, there is a 100% chance of bombing and a 100% chance of killing at the exact same time. That's just the way it is. You have a 100% chance of killing. You have a 100% chance of bombing. I don't know how to explain that otherwise, but in any show that you go into, it's not like, I might do well or I might not do well. It's like quantum physics. Somehow they're both going to happen. You don't know which one's going to happen until you observe it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That you really don't, that's a good lead into the bombing and your story of a time where you felt like you bombed.
Yeah. I want to tell you two different stories if we have time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The first one I was really excited about it. It was when I was still living in San Diego, and I got a gig. I think it was through Gig Salad or something. And it said, "Hey Maher," didn't say "Hey Maher," but whatever. It said, "Hey, we've got 500 Kuwaiti national students who are going to school in San Diego, and we want to do some comedy. We saw a couple of your videos. We think you'd be a good fit. We wouldn't mind if you could pepper in some Arabic in there, just because these students are they speak English, but they're certainly native Arabic speakers." I said, "Sure."
Do you speak Arabic? I'm sorry, I have to Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
and I've incorporated it in Arabic when I know that there's a lot of Arabic listeners out there. So I said, sure, I can incorporate some Arabic into it. And they told me where it was going to be, and it was somewhere in Mission Valley in a big park, and it was 500 people. And I think it ended up being closer to like 800 people. So I get there, it's a beautiful sunny day. Problem number one, comedy in the day outside in the sun. It's like vampires. I mean, we're like vampires. It's like
that's funny you say that because I have compared that performing in the daytime to vampires quite often. Like even on stage, I'm like I've said that it's like stand up is supposed to be after dark. It's like if vampires, we're like vampires. We don't come out during the day.
Right. It's like it's like taking someone who plays guitar and say, "Hey, turn off all the lights and play." Yeah, they can do it, but it would be nice if they can see what they're doing.
Exactly.
Whereas the guy sitting there in the dark playing the guitar, like, yeah, I'm feeling my way through it, but I would like to look down every once in a while.
Yep.
And so this was a daytime show. It was like 2 p.m. And I go up there and 500 people, 600, 700. Wow. I'm on stage. This was a bigger show that I've done in a while. And it's daytime, and I've got these guys going for the most part. And you know how sometimes in stand-up, there is this weird thing that happens every once in a while. It doesn't happen that often. Where, let's say you're doing a 25-minute set. Somewhere around minute 19 or 18, you suddenly hit a wall. And you just go, either I don't know where to take the rest of my material, I've forgotten where to take the rest of my material, or it seems like they're really losing interest. I hit that weird wall, and I was doing okay up until then. And then suddenly there was this guy in the corner on a motorcycle who was like, he was putting the Kuwaiti flag on his back, and he was way in the back, and he was going to ride around, I guess, with the Kuwait flag. And for some reason, I locked in on him, and I could not get back to my stand-up. I just could not get back to my stand-up. So finally, I look at the guy who booked me, very young college student. He looked at me, and this is what he did. He went, "Just end it." I was like, so I was like, yeah, he literally went, "Just wrap it up." So funny. Yes, I was like, I didn't bomb necessarily, but that wall just.
Yeah. And that happens. It's weird too, because I don't know. I've definitely seen that with audiences and with my stand up where I can have jokes that work really well, 9 times out of 10. And then, when you hit that one time and it doesn't, and you're like, well, what happened here? That was a proven joke.
Right.
But I have that like where it's not always the same joke. Like it's a mix, And that actually kind of happened at my Dry Bar taping where the first show, I mean, I, as a performer, kind of stumbled over some of my own words. The crowd was into the show and they were still having a good time. Most everything hit. There was a few things that probably didn't hit as hard on the first show, but then on the second show, those same jokes that first crowd was into, just nothing. Like I remember thinking, and I would, it would be neat. It would be kind of fun to see the look on my face when I did this joke and got complete silence, because in my brain, I'm like thinking, well, fuck. If you didn't like that, you know what I mean? I'm like looking into the audience like,
it's weird. It's really weird.
And I can't remember if I said something. I think I did. I think I was just like, well, all right. I, just kind of like a mumble to myself, but.
And it can be hard to recover for sometimes it can be really tricky. Sometimes you impress yourself, I suppose, when you pick them back up on the next bit or next punchline or what have you. And then sometimes you're just like, I just really want to get out of here at this point.
Oh yeah. Well, and that kind of, I felt like that, on that second show, like, because this is what the weird thing was. This is how you can tell the difference on how the first audience reacted to me versus the second audience. Is that the first show I did almost my full 25 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I missed a joke or two. There was a tag I wanted to do in a certain chunk of material, and I missed it. But I still did almost 25 minutes. Mm-hmm. Second show, I did the same exact material, including the tag I missed from the first show, and I finished up at like 22, 23 minutes.
That's amazing. That is
like,
amazing.
That's the difference.
Yeah,
and it was almost the same. And I felt like on the second show, I performed better than the first as far as technically. Like, my energy might have been a little off because it was later and I was tired or whatever. But, I pronounced my words better. I was more articulate.
Yeah.
And, like, I was really in the zone performing, but the crowd just not having me.
I had the second story I wanted to tell you. Sometime around early 2017 or so, I decided to throw my name in the hat for Wednesday night, amateur night, Apollo Theater in Harlem. And I emailed them, and it said, hey, if you're a talent, if you're any talent, musician or what have you, email us and we'll take a look and see if we can get you on a Wednesday night, amateur night. I was like, yeah, why not? I live in DC. It's not that far. It's just a short bus ride up. I'll throw my name in the hat. Oops. So I emailed them, and to my surprise, about a month later, an email came back and said, hey, Maher, we think you'd be a good fit. Why don't you come up on June 6th? Come up and do Apollo night in Harlem. And I was like, yeah, of course. I'm not going to say no. This is iconic Harlem theater, Mm-hmm. Now, at the time, I had to go overseas for a month. So I went overseas, and I came back, and about 3 or 4 days later, I had to go to Harlem. So I was like tired, fatigued. I just came back from overseas, like, well, I got to go do this. Now, the Wednesday night, amateur night at the Apollo gives you 3 minutes. So it's 3 minutes of stage time. Ooh. For a comic, you think, okay, I want to go in there, I just want to punch, 3 minutes. But I also want to tell them who I am, like I want to do my thing. So you're supposed to get there in the morning because they have a dress rehearsal. So I get there at like 10:30. Wow. Yeah, they do. It's a real deal. So you get in there, they get a dress rehearsal. I walk in the green room, and I'm the only comic. Everyone else is very talented musicians and dancers. They're from all over the country. I remember there was a big dance group from Chicago. And I'm looking, they felt like kids to me because I felt like I was kind of old. But some of them, just watching them practice the piano and singing, I was like, what am I doing here? This is talent. Like, these guys are talented. Like, they should be at the Apollo. And I was like, what am I doing here? But everyone was very sweet, and we got to know each other and did the rehearsal. And the lady who runs the thing, she's been doing it forever. She said, okay, Maher, that was good. Tonight, do the same thing. Just do your thing. Do the same thing. So I go back to the Apollo that evening to do it. And I think there was 15 acts, and I was number 13 or so. And so I'm watching, you got the screens in the back. By the way, Dan, the theater is packed. They sell it out. It's 3,000 people or 2,200 or so. 2,200.
Wow.
Or maybe it was 2,000. Either way, it's a lot of people.
After like 1,500 people, it's like, right. Does it matter? How accurate do you need to be?
Right, let's just call it 1,000. And the theater has several levels. You got the lower level, and you got the middle level, and then you got the upper level. So you got people like looking down at you. So I'm watching these kids go out there and just sing their heart out. This one guy on the piano, just beautiful voice. He's playing the piano. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I just got to go do my comedy here in a minute. So then the guy before me gets booed. Just booed.
Oh no.
and he gets the hook, and they take him out, and I'm like, oh man. And then I was like, well, just go out there and do your thing. Just do 3 minutes of comedy and go back to DC.
Which, for the people listening that who may not be comedians, you hear, and even as a comedian, you hear 3 minutes and you're like, oh, that's not much time. But when a set's going poorly, 3 minutes is an eternity.
especially when you got a big crowd like that and there's some pressure. But that's a side topic. That's why I think a lot of comics don't do good in competitions. Mm-hmm. Because when you know you're being judged, it really messes with you.
Oh, absolutely.
So anyhow, I go out there and I open up with my usual same crap I open up with because I thought it would be good. And it was. And they started laughing, and I was like, all right, I feel good now. I can do my 3 minutes, and who knows, maybe I'll place in this thing. So, and then I'm about a minute and 10 seconds in, okay? And I'm about to deliver my next setup, not even a punch, just the setup to my next thing. And I hear the boos coming from the right. I hear
no.
I hear the booze picking. I mean, it was like watching a tsunami, like a wave. Literally, I could see it happening. I'm not even being sarcastic.
I believe you.
I could see it happening. They were like, boo. It was like getting louder and louder. And then the left side of the room started cheering. And then it was a competition of boos and cheers. I'm not even kidding. So I look over to the lady who runs it. She's in the wings over here. I look over and she goes, just keep going, just keep going. So I kept going, and I probably did about 2.5 minutes to boos and cheers. I'm not being sarcastic when I say this. My last punchline was yelled into the microphone, was absolutely yelled into the microphone. And then I go, thanks everyone, like yelling. And there's boos and cheers, and then I get off stage. I ended up probably scoring somewhere in the middle. I wasn't like dead last, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I started with my first. But the weird thing is, here's the interesting part of the story. I thank everyone. I get a certificate. I was like, all right. I had a hotel somewhere in Manhattan, so I go outside to catch the subway. But when I go outside, there's some girls that are walking by, and it turns out they were from Sweden or Norway. I don't remember where they were from, but they said, hey, you were the comedian tonight. And I said, yeah, I was. And they said, oh, we thought you were really funny. I said, okay, thanks. That made me feel pretty good. And then I get on the subway, and I'm sitting on the subway just like I'm sitting now, and I'm leaning up against the wall like this of the subway, and I'm like doing the typical comedian thing where it's like, who cares? But then you start going, but that set wasn't right, and I should have done this, and I should have done that. And there's a woman sitting right in front of me, and she goes, excuse me, were you the comedian tonight? And I said, yeah, I was. And she goes, I thought you were really funny. I said, oh, thanks a lot. And she goes like this to her husband. She goes, that's the comedian. And they go, yeah, you were really funny. And they shook my hand. And the weirdest thing happened probably ever in my entire life. The entire subway train, obviously not the whole thing. The cart that I was in started cheering and saying, hey, it's the comedian. Yeah. And I was like, what is
Wow.
I'm not kidding, man. Everyone in this cart started cheering, hey, the comedian, give it up for the comedian. And I was like, all right. And then I was just in my hotel room like, and then the next day I took the bus back to DC.
Wow, that's an incredible story. That's not really a bombing story, though. It doesn't sound like you bombed, but that was definitely a great story for this podcast, because the fact that you're trying to like perform to both cheers and boos, talk about confusing.
Yeah, the Kuwait story, I apologize I didn't bring you a true bombing story. I'm happy to tell you a true bombing story.
No. Okay, I mean,
I thought you'd appreciate those two stories more, because the first one was just like, it just died. And the guy just did this. He was like, dude, get off the stage.
Anytime somebody that's producing or booking does the old cut it out and get off the stage, that's close enough to a bomb as far as I'm concerned.
That was like, dude, you're dying. Just get off.
It's like, it doesn't matter how good you did up until that point. When that happens, when they're like, you're dying, just get out of there. Then you know.
It's exactly right. It does not matter how good you were doing before that. Once you get this, you're like, they're not telling me I'm over my time. They're telling me
you're done. Yeah, you need to get out of here.
Anyway.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Like the whole it's weird too, because I don't, I've watched some stuff from the Apollo or whatever, but I think some people, even if if you're funny or whatever, they are talented, they boo just because that's like the thing to do. You know what I mean? Where it's that's part of their history, of that theater.
It absolutely is. If you ever have a chance, and I would recommend any comic to do it. I was actually just trying to not Apollo. I was going to say YouTube. Go to YouTube and watch the Bernie Mac documentary. It's about 48 minutes an hour. It's a really, number one, it's touching because he was a great comic, and obviously,
absolutely.
But just hearing his story and how he handled rough crowds and how he handled people is really fascinating. Mm-hmm. He was just like, I don't care what you guys think of me. I'm going to come out here and just knock you dead. That was his philosophy. And who else had that philosophy was apparently another documentary, or maybe it was on WTF, I can't remember, was Sinbad. Sinbad had that mentality. He's like, I don't care who's going on before me, who's going on after me. I don't care what the size of the crowd is. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to own them. And he did that. It was interesting.
And he also doesn't do a lot of writing or didn't,
Right.
He would go up, from what I've heard, and just pretty much improv. He would just, off the cuff on a lot of stuff, which makes it even more incredible.
I know. I think he's super underrated. I think he's hilarious.
Yeah. I always enjoyed him, not just as a stand-up, but I always thought he was a great comedic actor too.
Oh, yeah.
He's in some of my favorite movies.
He's just his facial expressions, his presence. He's a big guy. Mm-hmm. He's just funny.
Absolutely.
He's just a funny guy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird too, because as far as the Apollo thing goes, I didn't realize they had like an amateur night. But isn't that, you think about that? Like, okay, when we think of amateur nights, to us that's open mic. So essentially, this is their version of an open mic. They sell out a 2,000 to 3,000 seat theater.
And that's
insane.
I know. I asked the lady that. She's been doing it forever. I said, ma'am, is your Wednesday night every single time like this? She said, absolutely. We sell out. There's people that come from all over the world. There's people from all over the city, all over the country. They want to come to amateur night and be here in this theater. And it was packed. I mean, if it was a traditional comedy show, like an MC opener, feature headliner or something or whatever, you would have been on cloud nine to walk into this place and perform. I mean, it felt like it was amazing. And that's why I don't regret doing it. I think it was an absolute blast and it was a lot of fun. And, but man, it was intimidating when they started doing it. When they started doing it, it's like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously, but like I said, it's still confusing because you were getting simultaneously being cheered and booed.
I'm not even. I wish it would have been one way. Obviously, I would have preferred the cheers, but it was interesting to see a one side boo and one side cheer.
Well, I would say that ultimately the cheers won. Since you got cheered out of the train cart.
I didn't get to hug, man. And then I was just back in the subway, back at my hotel, and back in DC, just like back to normal life. That can be hard too, by the way, for a comic. I know you're probably wrapping up soon, but that can be hard too for a comic when you have a killer show and you have a blast, and then you kind of have to just go back to normal life.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's comics that have like one day went and filmed for a late night TV show, and then the next they're back at their regular minimum wage paying job.
That's right.
That's comedy.
The story. I don't know if this is true or not, but I always heard the story of Rodney Dangerfield when he was selling like aluminum siding. He was literally selling aluminum siding and he said he would be on the Tonight Show, and then some lady would see him selling aluminum siding in the neighborhood and go, "Weren't you on the Tonight Show?"
That's about it is. And it's crazy because comedy is almost like one of the only few like careers or entertainment industries where that can really happen, like for like an actor, you can be a really bad actor and still make a decent living at it, right. And you really have to go off the deep end to not make a living doing acting or whatever. But with like comedy, it's you can be performing for thousands of people one day and the next you're mowing a lawn or flipping burgers or whatever. So it's pretty crazy.
That's right. And it can be hard on you sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
it starts to plays with your psyche a little bit.
Oh, it absolutely does. I mean, even going back like after a good show and just going back to your hotel room by yourself can get can really mess with the psyche because you're like, oh, you're in that moment, you were like this big shining star, and then now you're just by yourself in your hotel room,
One of my favorite feelings, eating just whatever you can get your hands on.
Well, I was going to say probably eating something you bought at a gas station because it's the only thing open.
That's right. My favorite feeling is that if you're lucky enough to do 2 shows on Friday and 2 shows on Saturday, one of those situations, my favorite feeling is after the Friday second show. Because you're like, you know what? I get to go home and chill out, and next day I get to take a shower, put my clothes back on, and go out and do this again on Saturday.
Yep.
That's a good feeling.
It absolutely is a good feeling. Oh, man.
Anyway.
Yeah, no, those are great stories. To get into some of the other stuff I like to cover, the bumming of bombing, the dreadful feeling after you bomb. Typically, how long does that last for you, and how has that changed over the years?
It used to last a long time. It used to make me go, okay, I'm not funny. I don't have what it takes. When it was doing that to me, it would last a while. It would kind of just really rub me the wrong way, and I really couldn't get over it until I had a good show again. Then I'd be like, well, okay, maybe I am funny. Nowadays, I can usually just laugh it off.
Mm-hmm.
Literally laugh it off.
Yeah.
And then what will happen after a bad show is there's usually 1, 2, 3 at most people that I like to talk to. Not to like go, hey, help me get out of this depression. Instead, I like to go, man, I got to tell you about this bad show I had, which is kind of another point. Sometimes it's funner to talk to your comedy buddies or your close friend who you share stuff with about the bad show than it is the good show.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's like, hey, man, you're not going to believe this thing that I just went through is hilarious. And it's funny to you because of how bad the show was.
Yep.
So thankfully now when it happens, I can kind of calm myself down and think, oh, it's not a big deal. And I'll laugh and truly laugh about it. And it doesn't matter that much. But I do like to talk to 1 or 2 people that come to mind right away. Mm-hmm. That I like to go, man, I got to tell you about this.
Those it's funny too, because like those horrible shows, they really are the fun ones to talk about. After after you get past the experience, then you're like, okay, I can laugh this off. You're not gonna believe what I just went through, because you're right, it is hilarious. But I'm curious, you mentioned how like when you first started and you would get these feelings, when you bomb, you feel like, I'm not funny and this and that, and it would really get to your mentally. At what point in comedy did you get past that where you're like, okay, it's just what it is?
I don't know.
And not thinking, oh, I'm just not funny and I'm not going to make it, because you're still doing comedy and you've been doing comedy for a while.
I don't know that I could really pinpoint the time, but I do know that what helps me mentally is when I was still getting booking offers. Not like, don't get me wrong, they weren't rolling in, but every once in a while someone Facebooks you or emails you and says, hey man, I got a show on a Wednesday, I want you to come to it. That usually can lift my spirits, because I go, all right, you know what? Forget that one. Let's go on to the next one. When I first got into comedy, my friend Shane, who was a comic, he stopped doing it a while back, but he was older than me, probably 15, 20 years older. And I had a bad show, and he took me under his wing, and I still message him maybe once every couple of weeks. And Shane is the first one that told me this, and I try to live by it, and it's helped. He said, you absolutely learn more from the bad shows than you learn from the good shows. Like in some ways, the bad shows actually teach you something, and they're kind of good for your ego too, because you can get very like, oh, I'm this brilliant comic, I can make anyone laugh, and I'm hilarious. And then you have that bad show, and you go, well, you need to check yourself a little bit, because you're not, you can still go in there and just die on stage. Yep. So anyway, Shane's advice has helped me a lot. Just, you learn from the bad ones, take it for what it is, question it a little bit. Why did it not go well? And there's that old classic question in comedy: is there such thing as a bad audience? Mm-hmm. People always wonder, is there such thing as a bad audience?
Yeah. But that's another good lead-in. It's like almost like you've heard some of this podcast, because you're leading me into these questions so well. You talked about looking at trying to figure out what went wrong and learn from it, which brings me to my next question. What do you do to analyze your sets after you either bomb or when you have a good show, to try to improve the next performance?
It used to be the actual material. I would go, well, I didn't say that particular line right. I totally forgot about that line. But believe it or not, lately it's been more body language. When I go back and look at a couple of old clips, and I'm sitting there with the mic in my hand, and I keep doing this and keep looking down and keep touching my head, and I keep looking down, like, why are you looking down so much? Like, yeah, you're so comfortable that you can kind of be lax, but look at them, And so because I think there's something psychological about you as a comic looking at the crowd, making eye contact with people really helps, and smiling really helps. But now when I go back and look at videos, I'm really gauging the speed at which I'm talking and the body language. language more so than the actual, I didn't like that particular punchline or the way I said that particular punchline. Because let's face it, every show is different than the next one. You say, this time you said red chicken, the last time you said red chicken. Like it's weird that but your body language hopefully can stay somewhat consistent. I hope. But,
yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and that's a good point too about, making eye contact and smiling more. Those are all things that I've tried to work on. And the people who, going back to San Diego and Comedy Heights, before it was Comedy Heights, they were Brouhaha, and Chris Clobber was, kind of one of the main, was the co-producer, and he really did a good job at like kind of helping them with the talent and stuff. And that was something he pointed out to me, after kind of auditioning for them and then doing some shows, that I looked down a lot. And, and then I started looking at videos and saw exactly what he was talking about. He's talking about those, they're like these little tics that we have,
No, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say it, and since then I've noticed tics with other people too, where it's like not just looking down, but like something they might do, wrapping the cord around and doing this, just like certain ways they move that end up becoming a tic. And then those tics end up becoming more distracting. And then as I'm sitting out in the audience, I'm more concerned. I'm focused on this tic more than what they're saying, and then you're missing the material. And I'm sure that's what happens with an audience too.
Of course. And then the other part of that is looking up and looking down, looking right, looking left is, when you supposedly, and I don't remember exactly what this is, but, part of your brain analyzes some information. You have your vocal side or speech side. I don't know. But anyway, when you try to remember certain things, you might look to your upper right. When you try to remember a name, when you try to remember a song, you might look to upper left, or the name of a comic you like or something, you might look to your upper left. Whereas if you're trying to remember what you were going to say, you might look down, you're like, what was I going to say to you? And then you look down. And so that's my explanation for material, because as you're subconsciously looking for that next bit, you might look down and then go, oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yep. And that's exactly what I was doing. I know I was looking down because I was thinking about what I was going to say next.
And the fact is, it just doesn't. The other thing, by the way, the other thing that's really helped, and I'm sure you feel the same, is I'm not scared of silence anymore. I used to be so scared of when it got quiet, I'm not talking for 3 minutes. I'm talking just for those few seconds of nothing's going on, just for the few seconds while the next bit kind of blossoms again, and then it kind of comes down. And then I used to be really kind of like, I don't like the silence. I got to just go talk. But you don't have to. You can take a moment to kind of reset the stage every once in a while. It's weird.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think that's important too, just because, especially when you're doing longer sets, when you're featuring and headlining, those, like you said, almost little resets are welcome. And also, you can take your time. You don't have to rush, like you have 30 minutes. And what happens if you rush through all your material in 20 minutes? You still have 5 minutes you need to fill. And
you'll see that a lot with comics that go up and do 30 minutes, and the first 3-4 minutes are just kind of chit chat, getting to know the place. I remember one time, by the way, Shane, the comedy mentor, pretty much, when he first saw me do my second or third set, maybe my second, I don't know, ever, I put my elbow on the mic stand like this, and I had the mic, and afterwards he goes, Maher, you're not good enough to do that yet. And I didn't know what he meant by that. And I did not know what he meant by that. I didn't know what he meant, but I was like, what do you mean? I'm just putting my arm. But I was like, now I get it. Because you see comics do that, and some comics can get away with it. They've got the personality for it. They can still deliver their lines. He goes, but Shane's point was like, focus on your material, focus on your delivery. Don't get super relaxed up there just yet, where you're kind of going, anyway, folks,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yep.
I thought
and
that
that is an interesting point. That is a good point too, especially when you are first starting out, because that's something I've noticed. A lot of comics seem to like focus on the wrong things right away.
Yeah.
They're more concerned with, trying to be the funniest or whatever, which you want to be funny, but they're more focused on, oh, I got to get booked, and I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to do this, and I got to be this, and I got to be that guy. And really, the only thing you need to do is write and work on being funny.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you're taking driver's ed, and here's the steering wheel, 10 and 2. They used to teach us 10 and 2. Now it's like 9 and 3. But if you went to driver's ed and you put your hand on top of the steering wheel like this, they would go, "What are you doing? Like you're not that comfortable as a driver yet. Relax." Yep. And that's kind of what I think Shane was telling me, was like, "Hey, dude, go back to 10 and 2. You can't do this just yet.
You're not quite.
Not quite Shane there yet. No, you're not quite there. You'll get there. You're not quite there.
Just be patient.
Because if a deer jumps out in front of you, you're not going to know what to do. If you're first starting to drive and you've got your hand like this, I think that's what Shane's point was. The first time that joke doesn't hit, the first hector you get, if you're doing one of these, your body's, it's not going to work out. Anyway.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That is a good point. Now I like to switch around. We talk about a lot of dark stuff in this, so I like to switch it around and do some fun stuff. Do you have a pre-show ritual or tradition, something you do before every performance?
Yes, which goes back to the drive to the comedy venue. So my wife and I fight about this a lot. All I listen to is trance music. Electronic music, but in particular the genre of trance. And I can talk about trance music more than I can talk about comedy. It's all I listen to, Above and Beyond, and all these other big DJs that I really like. And I drive my wife crazy because I listen to it essentially all day in the car, if I'm at home cleaning, podcasts, and I download all these free podcasts. And so usually, because I'm already listening to trance in my car, when I'm in my car, I'm listening to it at a high volume, but not because I'm like, yeah, comedy. Not like that, but because it puts me in a mental place where it kind of just makes me feel relaxed. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it kind of makes me get out of the car and go, I'm going to have fun. So the closest thing I have to sort of a ritual would be music.
Okay. No, that's good. It's an interesting choice of music.
Yeah, I just always liked electronic music, in particular the genre, and Kate calls it techno, which drives me crazy. I tried to explain to her, I was like, Kate, calling trance techno is like calling a bar a saloon. Like, yeah, technically you could call a bar a saloon, I suppose, but it's very different. They're very different things. It drives me crazy.
That's hilarious.
It drives me absolutely crazy.
Oh, now on the opposite of bombing, what has been your best or favorite gig that you've done so far? I mean, obviously you've had some good shows along the way. You did a lot of festivals. You did Dry Bar.
Yeah, Dry Bar was really fun. I think there's a festival, I think I do the Arab American Comedy Festival every year, which this year it's going to be on Zoom. The Arab American Comedy Festival happens to take place in New York, and it happens to take place at Gotham Comedy Club, which, has that iconic background that says Gotham and it's Manhattan, and it's a really good film. When we have Friday and Saturday sold out shows there, that is probably my favorite comedy. And it has nothing to do with the Arab American community. As a matter of fact, most of the time, the audience is probably only about 40% Arab American. The rest of it's pretty diverse. But being in that particular comedy club, and I imagine DC Improv, all these big comedy clubs are the same, but being in Gotham where the comedy club is just really wide and it goes really deep and it's absolutely packed, and you have to, as you're walking to the stage, you kind of have to walk around tables and move around. That is probably my favorite comedy. Now, it would be nice to do theaters, but going into Gotham when it's a full out crowd and that energy's there, that's a lot of fun.
That sounds pretty incredible.
It's a lot of fun. Now, that's my only entrance into Gotham. By the way, really quick story. One time I got a chance to do a new talent night at Gotham Comedy Club, and I was going almost last in the roster. And this was at the Monday after the Arab American Comedy Festival, okay? And I wasn't in the mood to do it. I'll just tell you right now, I was not in the mood to do it. I was tired. I was grouchy. I had to go back to Long Island, stay with my wife's in-laws, grandmother, and then I'd take a train back to D.C. It was just a lot, and I was really tired. Now, New Talent Night requires that every comedian, at the time, I think, bring either 12 or 15 people.
Holy jeez.
Yeah, 12 minimum, but it may have been 15. Now, I didn't have to because I had won a little online competition that said, hey, if you win this little writing competition, you get to go. So I didn't have anybody there. I was like, okay, but whatever, I'll go do it. Now, what does that mean? that means that there was at least 200 people in this comedy club for a new talent night. So I was like, well, I got to be in the mood to do this. But I wasn't. So I went up almost dead last. Almost. Now, around comic number 2 or comic number 3, I see a man walk into the comedy club. I see him go sit in the back with a notepad. And he was very nicely dressed, very handsome man who was like taking notes on the comics. I go, oh man, who's that guy? I mean, this is New York. Who is that guy? He could be anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I go, well, I gotta get in the mood. Now I want to go up there and do the best I can. So sure enough, comic after comic, I can see this guy writing, and then I can see him kind of looking around. He'd kind of lose interest a little bit, then he'd get engaged again. And I go, all right, I want to go up there and I'm going to keep this guy's attention. The comic before me, unfortunately, did not have a good set at all. Really bad set. When this comic got off stage, it was my turn. And I kid you not, Dan, this guy took his notepad as this comic walked out, folded it up, and I go, no, he's not leaving. He's sat there for an hour and 20 minutes. He's going to leave now. He folds it up, and as I'm physically walking to the stage, he's physically leaving the club.
Oh, no.
it was here's me coming, and it was perfect timing. He goes like this. And I was like, are you serious? So I had a so-so set. That doesn't really matter anymore. The next day I emailed Gotham, the contact that was booking this. I said, hey, thanks a lot for having me. I got to know, who was that guy? I said that. And they said, oh, that was a talent agent. I was like, no, he could have seen my set and go, absolutely not. I'm not interested whatsoever. Or he could have seen it and said, yeah, we need to talk. I would like to talk to you. Either way, I would have wanted him to sit in my set. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. It's not about.
Even if he had crumbled up my name and said, that guy's crap, I just want him to see it. And
yeah, especially after sitting that long, like pretty much through the whole show.
That's
yeah.
Right.
Oh my God. That's rough.
It was rough.
All right. Well, the final thing I like to do a game called Pick a Number. You're going to pick a number between 1 and 20, and I'm going to ask you a corresponding question. Some of it's maybe comedy related. Some of it's just life related. You don't know what you're going to get.
No, that's interesting. I like this game. I think I'm going to go with number 14.
All right, number 14. Now, this actually ends up being a popular one. It's funny.
Really?
Yeah. It's interesting that number gets picked a lot. I might have to rearrange these a little bit. But the question is, do you ever stop and think about the number of butts in the world?
I do think yes. I think about things like that from a comedic perspective. Like. Yeah, I've thought about how many butts there are in the world. I think I've thought that because I've also thought about things like every single person you see. It doesn't matter if it's the president or a gang member; they all have to use the bathroom.
Yeah,
every single person. Celebrities, CEOs, homeless people. Everybody has to use the bathroom. So in that sense, yeah, I've thought about the rear end. Usually not in a sexual capacity, but certainly in a scientific curiosity.
Scientific experiment capacity.
Right.
I've definitely thought about
Yeah, and I've thought about it in a sexual capacity as well. I'm not saying I haven't.
Just not on the reg.
There's 7 billion out there, for goodness sakes.
Well, and I brought this up with another guest. That's not even counting animals.
Oh, that's
There's a lot of butts out there.
That's a lot. That is a lot. That's a lot. Baboons. I mean, look at baboons.
Yeah. We're just a world of butts.
At the end of the day, yeah, that's all you are.
Yeah,
that's it.
This is just a planet of butts. That's all Earth is.
It's true. It's kind of depressing and funny at the same time.
It really is. Oh man. Oh, this has been great. Go ahead and promote yourself. Where can people find you? Do you got, I know you have a podcast and all that stuff.
Thanks for the opportunity. I haven't done the podcast in a while. I got to get back on it because of, everything. But I would certainly appreciate the support. Maher _Matta for Instagram, and certainly on Facebook, comedian Maher Matta. That would be awesome if you guys could show your love I would certainly appreciate it. And of course, I'm sure Dan feels the same way. If you can support the Dry Bar comedy scene, a lot of good comics on there, including me and Dan, we would certainly appreciate your support on that too. My comedy special.
I was just going to say, what's the name of your comedy special?
Mine is called Personally Speaking. Maher Matta, Personally Speaking. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's all I got. I mean, I got a couple of shows coming up, but they're local. And then there's a private one next week. But, hopefully, Dan, these things can start getting back to the comedy clubs. I am going to be hosting, I just found out I'll be hosting on November 27th. At which is the day after Thanksgiving, Tally Ho Theater in Leesburg, Virginia. DC Improv is doing shows there because it's in Virginia and it's a theater.
Oh, wow.
And DC Improv is also doing stuff online, but they've offered me an opportunity. I'm really thankful for it. They're obviously a great club to host for them, MC for them, at Tally Ho Theater. So that's November 27th, the day after Thanksgiving. I guess it's still Black Friday, COVID Black Friday, I suppose. But
it'll be interesting.
I know. I thought about that. We'll see how it goes.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This was great.
Yeah, man. I really enjoyed it, Dan. Thanks. Good to see you and hope you stay safe, man.
The Art of Bombing is a Blitz Entertainment production. Hosted and produced by Dan Bublitz Jr., The Art of Bombing intro music was written and performed by John Holt. All other music used in this podcast was under the Creative Commons license. If you would like to help The Art of Bombing, you can do so by subscribing, rating, and reviewing our show on whatever podcast application you use to listen to The Art of Bombing. For previous episodes, blogs, and more, visit artofbombingpod.com. Have a great week, and remember, stay safe so you can live to love.